I recently faced a homeowner's worst nightmare. The HOA president, Eleanor Vance, tried to take my RV while she thought I was on vacation. Her reason? She said it was a parking compliance issue and needed to be removed. Funny thing is, the only thing removed in the end was her presidency when I flashed my badge. But let me start from the beginning. I got home 3 days early. The sky over my Denver suburb was the washed blue you see after a storm, the kind that makes everything look sharper and more honest. The Titan sat crooked in the driveway, its nose pointed slightly toward the lawn, its side door hung with a gap. I felt that cold slice of wrongness in my gut. I walked up the path, keys in my hand, and saw Eleanor Vance stuffing cloth bags into my rig like she was packing a picnic. She was loud. She always was, loud and bright and sure. She barked orders to her husband, Richard, who moved like a man trying to shrink inside his own body. Leo, their son, stood at the edge of the driveway, 19, shoulders bowed and guilty-eyed. Eleanor pointed at me like I was a trespasser on a crime scene she had curated. Her voice cut the air. "It's rented," she shouted. "You can see the paperwork, officer. He's lying. He's here to steal it." She had her phone in one hand. She hit 911 with the other. The call came with the practiced flourish of someone who used emergency services as an extension of personal policy. I kept my hands open. I kept my face calm. I kept my feet planted. 2 patrol cars rolled up slow. I recognized the lead cruiser's bumper, Sergeant Miller's unit. Miller had a slow, methodical way of looking at people. He favored suspicion like some people favor scotch. He was a man who liked the world to sort itself quickly into guilty and innocent. He already had his jaw set. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, leaned over his fence. He was an older guy with a stack of paperwork in his hand. Squinting, he called out, "Ethan lives here. He's out of town a lot, but this is his address." His voice tried to bridge the gap between what was true and what Miller wanted to be true. Miller ignored him. He stepped forward and pointed at me. His voice was flat. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicle." I complied. I raised my palms and did the small operator's count in my head. I was calm, but what tuned my senses tight was that the side door had prime marks. The metal by the latch showed the gray of exposed steel. Someone had used force. Someone had tried to bypass my lock. I pointed at the marks. I said, "Look at the latch. Those are fresh prime marks. That door didn't open that way this morning." I moved slowly. Miller watched my hands like a hawk. Officer Shaw trailed behind Miller. He was new to the beat, new enough that his jacket still had that stiff, small-town shine. Shaw glanced from Eleanor to me and back again. I reached into the cup holder and lifted the device inside. It was a fob relay. Small, delicate, dangerous in its quiet way. "This," I said, "is how they lift signals. They put a relay near the owner's fob. It fools the car into thinking the key is close." I kept my voice level. I wanted the words to land like tools on a bench. Miller stepped closer. He didn't want to see it. He wanted the story Eleanor told. Then, I showed them the jiggler. The jiggler was a hack's blunt instrument. The ping was from the immobilizer. The decoy drives only log tampering. Ramirez's text came through on my phone even as the alarm chirped on Eleanor's call. Jenna ping, too. I kept them tucked in my thoughts because I could not show the badge yet. That reveal would flex a different power. It would corral bodies and papers. For now, I had tools and truth. The neighbor who had vouched for me, Mr. Henderson, kept talking. He raised his voice and tried to layer facts over noise. "Ethan has an RV permit. He checks the rig every 2 weeks. It's his. He's deployed a lot for work. Look at his mail." Mr. Henderson's style was plain. He offered names and dates. Miller's jaw tightened. He nodded to Shaw like the neighbor was a background actor in Miller's script. Leo stood a yard from Eleanor. He looked timid, a teen carrying guilt. When I looked at him, I saw a kid squeezed by an authoritative voice. I softened my tone and walked to him. "Leo," I said, "Hey, you okay?" He blinked. His skin had that teenage flush. "Sir," he started. "I'm not here to make it worse," I said. "Tell me what happened. Be honest. You're safe." He cracked the way glass does when pressure meets thin ice. He dropped his eyes and then looked up, his voice small and edged. "Mom wanted to make a point," he said. "She said if she took the RV, she'd teach you about rules. She said she had proof it was rented, that you didn't care about the neighborhood. She said it'd be the perfect target." His words slid out in a rush. He flinched midway. He looked like he wanted to wish his words back into his throat. Miller moved then, his hand reaching for cuffs. His motion was a blade. The crowd stepped back like they had been rehearsed. Eleanor snapped, "See? He's trying to bully us." He's armed. Look at his hands. Her voice had the shriek of someone who thought loudness could be equal to truth. Men do what they have been taught to do. I raised my voice. It was not loud. It was calm. It was a different sort of steel. I'm FBI, I said. The words landed like puzzle pieces. The crowd swirled. Miller froze like the world had pressed pause. He kept his hand near the cuffs, but didn't clasp them. My badge hung at my belt. The metal caught the light. For someone like Miller, that was a turning point he did not expect. Badge in hand, I let it fall into view without theatrics. Special Agent Ethan Cole, I said. I live here. That's my RV. Those are prime marks. That is a fob relay and a jiggler in the ignition. The immobilizer pinged my team 2 hours ago. Minutes later, the watch commander took the scene. IIA was looped in. Shaw held the scene and kept everyone separated. I kept my sentences short. The truth was quiet. Sometimes it needed to cash in on specifics. Silence expanded. Eleanor's face was a paper craft of rage and embarrassment. Richard shuffled his feet and avoided eye contact, like he could hide in the seams of his shoes. Leo's shoulders curled toward himself. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted to leave his fence and pull me into a bear hug. Miller's jaw worked. He took half a step back. The tone in his mouth shifted. He spoke more carefully now. We got a call, he said. A woman said her neighbor was taking things. We have to respond to a 911. That's not a knock against 9/11, I said. 911 is for emergencies. It's not a hammer to crush people with. I said it softly, because some things, like hypocrisy, lost their heat when named plainly. Shaw tucked his hands in his pockets. He looked at the jiggler in the ignition, the relay in the cup, and the prime marks on the door. He looked at my badge. He looked at Leo. He looked back at Miller. The change in his face was a small confession. Miller's phone buzzed. Someone at the station had heard the muffled version of events. Miller put the call on mute, though the look in his eyes said the call had not gone unanswered. He took a breath and said, "Stay right here. Don't touch anything. We'll get statements." He turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am, we'll need you to step away from the vehicle." She clenched. "I'm the HOA president," she said. "I have authority. I can enforce rules." "You can enforce bylaws," I said. "You cannot break the law." Eleanor's glare was a machine. "Do you want me to call?" She stopped because the dispatcher's voice came into her ear from the 911 line. Her face flamed a color that would not be flattering in photographs. I knew how she worked. She wielded calls like a weapon. She believed her loudness could shape reality. She confused authority for righteousness. Neighbors watched from the curb as we began to log things. Phones were up. No one was talking now. I had to be precise. My training is an insistence on small facts becoming ironclad evidence. Words are slippery. Metal and timestamps are not. I pointed to the cup holder. I handed the relay to Ramirez. We photographed the ignition. We photographed the prime marks. I asked Officer Shaw to secure the scene and keep Eleanor and her husband separated from Leo. Just a precaution. He nodded and did it. Then, in that odd clatter between things, a tow truck rolled up. It had the logo of one of those HOA contract companies plastered on the side. It hummed like a wasp. The driver wore a uniform and a face that tried very hard to look like a professional. The driver said on the microphone that it was an HOA tow and that he had authorization. I felt something shift. There are moments when a plan moves into action and you realize the edges are sharper than you thought. I asked for the hook operator's paperwork. He handed over a clipboard with a letterhead from the HOA. It was filled with stamps and a captain's nod that looked legitimate. The operator started hooking the Titan. Before Shaw could block it, the operator latched on. Miller looked at the paperwork and then at my badge. He looked at Eleanor, who smiled like a queen watching a chess piece be captured. I felt the blood leave my face in a slow, aware flush. This was the sort of bureaucratic maneuver that chewed up truth with stamps and official seals. "Wait," I said. I stepped between the Titan and the tow truck. "You need to stand down. That authorized tow was not approved by the property manager. Private driveway, owner or court only. An HOA letter isn't enough. That company is not on our current list." Papers moved. People worried. Miller paused, his face a map of two choices. The boom lifted an inch. I stepped in close, palms out. "Private driveway. Unhook now." The operator spoke into his mic, eyes on me. "Dispatch. HOA tow is live." Eleanor clapped once, sharp. "Finally. Community safety." Shaw moved left, hand up. "Sir, kill the winch." The operator hesitated. Engines idled. Phones came out. Neighbors filmed. Mr. Henderson yelled from the fence. "Eleanor, your safety flyer still says last year's date." Richard took one step like he might help. then froze when Eleanor cut him a look that could chip ice. Jenna's voice hit my speaker. Ping confirmed. If it leaves, we can trail it. Ramirez whispered. Your call. Miller stared at the paperwork like it might grow new pages. Operator, I said, slow and clear. You tow this. You're part of a theft on camera. The winch whined, then stopped. The operator swallowed, then bumped the lever anyway. The Titan rolled an inch. Shaw barked. That's enough. Sirens echoed somewhere far. Eleanor smiled like she'd already won the parade. I felt the line snap from talk to action. The truck nosed forward. We let it go, just far enough to follow. The tow operator's rig was a neat mechanical mouth. It swallowed the Titan and started to crawl away. Ramirez and Jenna exchanged a look. Jenna tapped her phone. She read aloud. GPS ping. Decoy rig. The baited Titan. Last seen moving south. Tow yard and industrial sector. My heart knocked. I felt the cold, clean need to act. We shadowed the truck. I called in the state troopers. I kept a distance. It was a manageable kind of tail. The tow truck took back roads and old industrial lanes where the city's edges frayed into neglect. The driver's confidence sagged only slightly when he saw two unmarked state trooper units slip into following position. The copper flat storage yard leaned under an overpass like a secret. It was full of rigs with missing windows and cut wires. It smelled like gasoline and wasted things. The yard had that lawless feel of places where people bring items they don't mind losing ownership of. The tow truck pulled in and drove to a corner where other vehicles had been stripped down and cataloged. Troopers moved with the deliberate force of trained teams. They ringed the yard. They moved like choreography, quiet, precise, efficient. They called on megaphones. Men and women in plain jackets stepped out of shadowy corners. We split up to clear the property. A side door banged. A guy in a gray hoodie bolted with a duffel. Hands, I called. He ran along a line of dead rigs, jumped a puddle, slipped on oil, and pinwheeled. The duffel tore. Key fobs spilled like candy. Ramirez cut him off at the gate. The guy faked right, went left, and hit an air hose. Down he went, face first, breath gone. I reached him, knee to his shoulder, calm voice. Don't move. You're done. He stared at the fobs. It wasn't my idea, he wheezed. The lady said HOA had it covered. Name, I said. He shut his eyes. She called herself Eleanor and said, make sure it goes south. A trooper cuffed him. Jenna held up a burner phone from the shed. Same number chain, she said. The runner nodded at my rig. We just had to fake the start. Make it look like junk. He looked small now. She said the owner was a problem. I looked at the pile of copied fobs, the oily prints, the scared kid in a hoodie and not a mastermind, a link. I felt the familiar adrenaline of an operation that had the right facts. Inside my Titan, we confirmed the decoy backups had logged tampering. At first glance, the interior looked like a camp struck by a storm. Messes, detritus, but importantly, the logs. The decoy drives had tamper logs and last access timestamps. We traced the pings back and found the neat electrical fingerprints that matched the relay's signature. At the center of a pile of stolen electronics lay a set of fobs with curious fingerprints. They had been copied there. Someone had been attempting to harvest the signal. Another box contained a small stack of HOA memos and lists of vehicles from the neighborhood. One had Eleanor's handwriting. Leo's face went white when he saw the stack. State troopers cuffed the tow operator. They cuffed a man I had not noticed, a greasy fellow with a list of names and a contract envelope. He had an email chain on his phone, which we searched with a judge's telephonic warrant on body cam. The chain was coded in the blunt language of contractors. It named a drop, a time, a pickup. One thread had Eleanor's name. The phone had a message with a voicemail recording of Eleanor telling someone to make sure the rig goes south, and we'll handle the parking fines later. The yard's owner tried to make himself small and clever. He had a story about buying junk and reselling parts. His story was a skein of plausible lies. Troopers stripped the promises down. The GPS data chimed like a bell against his story. The decoy logs were incontrovertible. The tamper pings lined up with the hook time. We had a chain. We had a ring. Back at the neighborhood, word moved like a ripple. People peeked from blinds. Eleanor's smile had gone from cunning to brittle. The HOA's bylaws meant little when faced with a recorded voicemail and a ledger. You can shout rules into a void, but when paper and circuits speak, they speak louder than the loudest voice. Shaw stayed lead while we took statements. Eleanor tried to climb out of the mess. She spoke into the phone, calling lawyers she clearly thought she could buy with volume. Richard stood muttering, trying to make himself small. Leo slipped away for a minute like a kid avoiding grown-up eyes. He came back with a different look. He had the look of someone who had done his small part and felt the gravity of the consequences. We had the evidence we needed. The state troopers had the paperwork to make arrests. They did. Eleanor was taken in. At the precinct, they booked her on conspiracy, false reporting to 911, and motor vehicle theft-related charges. She posted bond by evening. Richard was interviewed as a witness, and Leo, who had been honest, was interviewed with care. The law treats young accomplices differently, and the troopers treated him like a witness who had made a bad choice. The HOA held an emergency meeting the next week. You could see the nervous theater in the room. Eleanor sat at the head of the table like she was still presiding over fate. Her hands shook when they set the interior cam clip on the projector. The room watched itself on the screen. Eleanor by my Titan, calling 911, pointing, angry. Someone in the back murmured. The gate logs were pulled up. I spoke from the sidewall, mic low. One more clip. The room went quiet. Ramirez tapped play. Eleanor's voicemail filled the speakers. Make sure the rig goes south. We'll handle the fines later. Eleanor slammed the gavel. Out of order. Murmurs rose. Richard stood, voice shaking. I signed the tow paper. She told me it was routine. It wasn't. He looked at Leo. I'm sorry, son. Leo's eyes were wet, but steady. I helped. I was wrong. He turned to the room. He lives here. It was a lie. Miss Peterson, 2 rows back, lifted a tin. I brought cookies. And the bylaws. Nervous laughs broke the air. The treasurer cleared his throat. Per bylaw 7.3, misuse of emergency services as grounds for removal. He looked at Eleanor. And for referral to law enforcement. Eleanor's face went hard. This is a smear. I held up the gate log printout. Timestamp. 42 seconds to the tow route. A hand shot up. Motion to remove the president. Another seconded. The gavel hung in the air. The vote was fast. Hands rose like a tide. Eleanor was removed as president. The decision was not a triumphal shout. It was paperwork and emotion passed and minutes recorded. But it was a public unseating. And in our town, that meant something. Eleanor left the podium with a rigid back and a face that wanted to be larger than it was. She had miscalculated how evidence moved. Sergeant Miller was suspended pending an IIA investigation. He would have to explain the choice to fixate on loudness instead of fact. He was a man who had depended on instinct. For him, the badge had been enough until it wasn't. The IIA team took his statement. They took the statements of the other officers. Truth had a way of cutting through old patterns. After that, the block cooled. The Titan sat straight with a new lock, and the Vance family moved out within weeks. That night on the porch, coffee cold, I felt 2 things at once. Relief would crack the ring and a quiet ache at how close noise had come to winning. Without a badge and logs, loudness might have buried the truth. Ramirez and Jenna stopped by. We sat in silence for a while. Jenna lit a cigarette, and then put it out, like she had lit and snuffed out a thought by force of will. You handled yourself, Ramirez said finally. He had that folded smirk that said more than congratulations. You played the long chess. I shrugged. I felt world-weary and sharp and tired. It's not over, I said. There's talk of lawsuits and HOA revisions. People will push back. Eleanor has supporters. She lost the job, Jenna said. That's a start. We sat for a beat and let the street go quiet. I breathed deep. My life is not a TV script. It is a ledger of small truths and careful moves. This time, the ledger balanced correctly. I returned to work and watched the IIA process trudge through its way. Miller's suspension opened a chance for him and his crew to recalibrate. I hoped he learned that the truth belongs to the slow, patient camera and not the loudest voice on the block. I hoped he would look at logs and fobs and timestamps like they were windows into people's lives. The HOA adopted 2-tier tow approval and posted rules enforced with respect. Leo sent a short message months later. He said he had a part-time job at a mechanic shop and that he was trying to learn honest work. He was still young. His voice had potential for repair. I wrote him back a line. You did right when it mattered. It was a small thing, but we are all held by small things. Some nights, I think about that thin line. Loudness isn't law. Calls aren't verdicts. Evidence wins. If there is a moral, it is that evidence beats noise. Loudness can be persuasive for a moment. It can bend attention, but paper and circuits do not yield to bluster. They are patient, stubborn witnesses. You cannot outshout a timestamp. The neighbors relaxed. The Titan stayed where it belonged. I slept better, but sleep is a soft victory. I kept my badge near when I went to bed. Not because I wanted to show it, but because the world is full of people who confuse power with right. My badge is a reminder that we carry tools for the quiet work, for the paperwork, and the patience that keeps our quieter rights from being stolen by louder mouths. Weeks later, I stood at the HOA meeting when they finally voted to rework the tow list and auditing processes. Cameras and gate logs were linked in a public file. No single voice could anymore declare a private verdict that meant legal action. The board sent out a memo to the community. It read simply, "We will not weaponize emergency services." I thought about the neighbor who had vouched for me, Mr. Henderson, the man who had raised his voice to say a simple fact. Mr. Henderson came by my gate and left me a pie as a neighborly gesture. I ate it in 2 slices like a weary man, catching a quiet moment. My teammates and I drove out to the yard where the stripped rigs had been stacked. The tow yard had been fined and shuttered. The owner was serving time for a string of thefts. Eleanor was scheduled for arraignment. Richard and Leo were not charged as principal actors, but their names lived on in the paperwork. Boys and men make bad choices under pressure. Consequences follow. Sometime after the courtroom dust had settled, Miller came by. He had a letter in his hand from IIA, a suspension, administrative, a small, heavy thing. He said, "Agent Cole, I wanted to apologize. You changed how I see things." He seemed thinner. The apology was not dramatic. It was a folded, honest thing. I nodded. "We all learn," I said. "I hope you do better." He left with his head lower, but his stride a little less sure. I wanted him to mean it. I wanted the lesson to stick. When I turned the key to the Titan months later, it fired like a thing that had been wrongly accused and then cleared. The immobilizer light blinked and went out. I took the rig down the road and felt a small thrill. It was mine. It had been tested and was intact. The world is messy. We make our claims and then prove them. I think now about the question that stewed under all of it like a low heat. Do facts matter when lies are louder? We live in a town, like anyone else, where noise can be persuasive. Sometimes the loudest gets traction. Sometimes the loudest erodes the fragile naivete of neighbors. But evidence has weight. It does not change with mood. It sits on servers and in logs and waits. I keep my hands clean when I can. I keep my tone measured. I keep my paperwork tighter than my mouth. The Titan sits in its storage space, ready. I go out on cases for work, and I come back and close the gate and breathe the thin Colorado air. The world tilts and rights itself a little. If you are reading this as a lesson, listen. When someone tries to claim power with loudness, ask the small questions. Where's the log? Who signed the paper? What's the timestamp? Facts are humble. They will not shout. They will, however, win. That was the lesson of the crooked driveway and the prime marks and the jiggler in the ignition. It was the lesson when a boy cracked under pressure and told the truth. It was the lesson when a badge saw a man about to be handcuffed because someone raised a voice. Evidence beats noise. Always. When the Titan grew quiet behind me, the echo of gravel crunching under its tires faded into the small hush of evening. My hands rested on the steering wheel longer than they needed to. I watched the last smear of sun slide off the ridge, and the neighborhood exhaled. Kids' bikes leaned on porches. A sprinkler clicked in someone's yard. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and gave up. I liked that quiet. I needed it. The work had a way of sticking. Evidence, statements, the small recoil of a kid who'd been pushed into a lie. The case had ended in arrests and paperwork in a community that needed mending. But there were threads left to follow, loose stitches on the hem of everything that had happened. I had a habit of tugging at those threads. Inside the house, the kettle hissed like a small, patient thing. My wife, Claire, had left a post-it on the coffee maker that said, "You did good." That was my anchor. It held me when the world tilted toward petty noise. She'd come home with soup and the kind of soft smile that made it easy to talk in real tones. We ate at the kitchen table, the light low, the conversation mostly about nothing, workday complaints, an upcoming parent-teacher conference for our daughter, Sophie, the neighbor with the new mailbox that looked deliberately Victorian. "I still can't believe you stood there and let Miller say it," Claire said, spoon scraping ceramic. "He blamed you like you were a prank caller." "I let him say enough," I replied. "Sometimes you have to listen to a man tear himself open before he realizes it hurts." She cocked her head. "You were mad." "Professional irritation," I corrected. I smiled because she'd asked for it. And a little personal satisfaction. Watching people realize they can be wrong is underrated. She laughed, soft and bright. And then it dulled, thoughtful. "What are you going to do about Eleanor?" The meeting seemed to hum like an angry bee. I'm not a judge of HOA elections, I said. But I will say HOAs answer to paperwork, to bylaws, to voters. Noise isn't a vote. She reached for my hand. Promise me you'll be gentle. There are kids in that family. I squeezed her fingers back. I promise the truth, I said. Gentle isn't always the same thing. The Titan sat like an animal at rest, chrome glinting under the streetlight. I went out and ran a finger down the hood, feeling the faint dust left from months of tension. It had been a containment exercise more than an arrest. The thieves hadn't managed what they'd set out to do. They'd come for bait, and they'd left with nothing that caused real damage. Leo had been the hinge. His guilt was a key. When he cracked, everything turned. Leo had been 19 but looked younger, a thinness to him that suggested he was still finding which parts of himself he wanted to keep and which parts to discard. The boy's tongue had loosened when I sat with him and asked one calm question after another. No accusations, no raised voice, just questions and the slow, steady light of logic that makes the corners of a lie show. He'd admitted the relay rigger had shown him how to zero out cameras. He'd sat up straight when I described logs and timestamps. And something in him recognized an order more honest than the chaos Eleanor demanded. It made me suspicious in a quiet way, how power made people forget the cost of yelling. Eleanor's voice had been a weapon. 911 for her was a trigger she pulled to create a scene. It was easier to shout and get the world to move than to write a check or sign a petition. That's the thing about loud people. Their actions leave small, bright stains. You just had to spot them. Later, I returned to the Copper Flats yard we'd raided to pull DVR files and logs. The yard had a chain-link perimeter and a sign with faded letters, Copper Flats Storage Yard. The smell of oil and dust hit me before the building came into full view. A radio played low country music, and a guy with a cap and a cigarette, Rico, leaned against the office, looking younger than the name suggested. "You read?" he said, nodding, then looked like he remembered me from a call about a fender bender months ago. "You with county?" "State." I told him FBI on a follow-up. He whistled low. "You got a warrant?" "No." I moved slow. "We can do this with your consent, or I can call a judge for a warrant. Your choice." The Titan was towed here under a dubious HOA claim. "Your GPS log shows movement last month around 3 in the morning. Who drove it? Who authorized the tow?" Rico wiped his hands on his shirt and squinted. "We do our paperwork straight. If an HOA calls with a claim, we go by their letter. Hook it, tow it. We don't ask too many questions." "And the records," I said. "The dial-ins, the timestamps for the hook?" He shrugged. "Everything's on file, but sometimes the owner signs a paper and we get busy. Lots of cars in, lots of cars out." I pulled up the tow manifest and showed him the copy I'd acquired. The signature was a shaky script. The phone number attached pinged to a device I'd traced not to Eleanor's registered HOA line, but to a burner that had been in and out of Wi-Fi ranges along the route of an Uber account. My pen tapped. Rico's face shifted. There was a look like someone hoping a small storm wouldn't touch them. "Listen," he said finally. "If someone says an HOA authorized it, and we got a call, we hook. Don't shoot the messenger." "I'm not," I said. "But if the messenger is answering to people who lie about authority, I need to know who those people are." He opened the office door and peered in. "You want the logs?" he asked. "Yes." We sat across from each other, and I watched his hand flip through dusty folders. The office smelled like stale coffee and someone's old cologne. The GPS printouts looked like a meandering snake of coordinates, and one line stood out, 2 a.m. The Titan was taken, routed to a storage cluster, then toward the tow yard. The pin had been deactivated for 4 minutes in the field. That was enough time for a swap if someone had thought it through, but not enough for them to get the engine to run, not with the immobilizer still in place. That told me they'd planned to steal and burn a bait, to destroy evidence, to make a spectacle. "You get any cameras from the lot?" I asked. He rubbed his jaw. "There's an interior cam by the office. It's in the system. It cuts out at times. I'll pull it." He handed me a thumb drive, and when I plugged it into my laptop in the SUV, the footage played. Grainy, late-night footage. Someone with a baseball cap and a hood walked slow past the Titan. The tow hook came down. In the reflection of the windshield, I saw a flicker, the kind of movement a jiggler makes when it hits a lock. A soft swishing sound followed. The file's time code stuttered for 2 minutes, and then resumed. The digital signature on the file had a gap. "You see that?" I said. Rico nodded. "System glitches sometimes." "It's a gap," I said. "Everything about this is a gap. The call, the signature, the gap in the video." He swallowed. "Someone wanted it gone. They wanted a show," I said. "Not a theft." A spectacle. Rico's eyes darted to the window. You think Eleanor did this? I didn't say it. I let him sit with his own conclusions. The tow manifest alone wouldn't get a warrant, but it would nudge an IIA supervisor the right way if presented with a consistent pattern. The lane back to our house took me past the Vance home. Eleanor's roses leaned toward the road like pink parentheses. Richard's truck sat in the driveway, small and immaculate. Leo's scuffed sneakers were on the porch like an invitation to see the young man again. I didn't park. I drove. I let the car's engine make the soft white noise I needed. Later that day, Jenna and Ramirez joined me at the precinct. Jenna's hair looked like someone had tried to put logic in a ponytail and failed intentionally. Ramirez smelled like the inside of a gym. We spread photos on a table like puzzle pieces. How many holes does that jiggler leave? Jenna asked, tapping an image of the ignition. Small, curved scrapes. I answered. You can miss them if you don't look with intent, but they read like fingerprints in a field of distraction. Ramirez grinned. So the thieves were sloppy. Not sloppy, I said. Showy. They wanted someone to see the attempt. You think Eleanor wanted the tow to happen? Ramirez said. Or the tow to be that show? I think she wanted the noise, I said. She wanted everyone to see that she was right to call, right to complain, right to act. The tow was the capstone. It let her shout, and a shout covers a lot of things. Ramirez leaned back. Can we link the relay rig to anyone? We have 2 partial prints on a screw and a fob from a relay that pings to a chain of phone numbers, I said. One of those numbers belongs to a man who's been keeping a low profile since he took an extra weekend job doing security for the neighborhood patrol company. He's reliable, modestly paid, and good with electronics. Jenna rubbed her chin. We could bring in the company, see who logged him out, and who authorized the towing as an HOA action. I said, if we can show the authorization was forged, we show motive. We worked like that, small, patient, threading timestamps through conversations. Each GPS ping was a breadcrumb. Each signature that didn't align with registered names was a little lie waiting to be lifted into the light. Miller's dismissal had corralled the more obvious problem, but the suburban political landscape was a long field. Power here was a matter of soft control, gate codes, committee assignments, and the quiet fury of people who think rules exist for the convenience of those who already have them. Leo called once at night. His voice was thin. Agent Cole. Leo, I said. You okay? I'm sorry, he said, and the words were small, wet. I got my dad involved. I'm sorry. You didn't have to do that, I said. You also don't have to keep feeling this alone. He laughed, absurd and sharp. You don't know the half of it. Try me. There was a long breath. Dad thinks we're better than some jobs, he said, like he told me once. Work is about dignity. He didn't teach me how to lie. That's probably a good lesson, I said. Leo made a sound that was part laughter, part sob. Eleanor made it sound easy, like it was for the good. She said any means justified the clean result. I thought if I helped, maybe she'd see me as useful, not like some mistake. People will tell you a lot of things to get you to act, I said. You're not responsible for another adult's ethics. I know that, he said. But I screwed up. I want to fix it. You already are, I said. You came clean. Silence cradled his next words. Do you think they'll go after me, my mom, my dad, if it gets worse? I don't know, I said. But I can tell you this. Telling the truth usually makes the noise die down faster than pretending it never happened. He breathed, and then the line cut. I sat in my car and listened to the dial tone and the end of a thing. It was small and fragile, like a bird brushing the window. Easy to miss, harder to fix. The legal team in my office liked to say the law was linear. It rarely felt that way, but evidence let you carve a path. It was the slow, persistent kind of persuasion that didn't need volume. It needed patience. In the following days, I interviewed neighbors. One woman, Miss Peterson next door, spoke like a person who polished the truth until it shone. Her house smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and the sun on old paper. She'd seen the tow truck, yes, but she'd also seen Eleanor on her porch the night before, pacing and talking into her phone, saying the neighborhood needed action, then later calling the tow company herself. Eleanor is a pill, Miss Peterson said, but she's also clever in a way that surprises you. She keeps receipts, loves lists. She once told me she liked a world with checkboxes. And you saw her call? I asked. I saw her make a call, Miss Peterson said. I also saw her hand Leo an envelope that looked like cash. I couldn't put my hand on a thing, but I know what I saw. That counts, I said. It's not proof, but it's a thread. She smiled. Sometimes, Clutter is more revealing than a tidy room. Miller, meanwhile, was an oddity I could not ignore. He'd left with the administrative suspension like a man who had been stripped of a comfortable armor. He'd apologized to me once more at the station. "Agent Cole," he'd said, folding his hands like a man who'd been taught to sit small. "I wanted to say thank you." I had kept my expression neutral. "You have a duty," I had said. "You should follow it." "I will," he said. "I'll do better." Whether he actually would, that was a subject for another file. People changed when the cost of being wrong was tall and immediate. The more I pushed on the paper trail, the more things that had been fuzzy took a shape. Eleanor's name appeared in emails with the neighborhood's private security firm. She'd complained about lax enforcement and suggested the firm take a more active stance. The invoices showed extra after-hours monitoring that matched nights where someone walked the streets. Someone who knew how to work a jiggler and how to mute a camera for exactly 4 minutes. We served a subpoena on the security firm. The owner, a man with bright teeth, tried to be helpful until he realized his books might be counted. Then he tried to be helpful in a smaller way. A ledger slipped under his hand with a note, "Unauthorized expenses." He stammered about bookkeeping errors. "Who gives you the names for night patrol?" I asked. He named Leo's neighbor, then trailed off. "It's usually the HOA. They say names, we go." "And payment?" Jenna pressed. He looked down. "Sometimes the HOA doesn't pay, and someone covers. Sometimes someone says it was a favor. It's messy. Messy surprises people," I said. He flinched like a man belatedly punished by accuracy. The more we gathered, the more the pattern looked like premeditation rather than opportunistic theft. The ignition tampering, the relay pinging devices, the jiggler borrowed from a garage of someone who had access to HOA tech inventory wasn't elegant. It was a middle management op, the kind people execute when they feel the ground is theirs because they voted on a slate once and then stopped treating rules like mutual contracts and started treating them like ladders. We planned a discreet interview with Leo's father, Richard. He was a gentle man with the kind of small hands that suggested work, not ceremony. He kept a sun hat in the rear seat of his truck and hummed along with country radio. I'd thought he'd be defensive. He wasn't. He was bewildered by the whole thing, like someone who'd walked into a dinner and found his name on a menu. "Eleanor told me to stay out of it," he said over cups of coffee in my interview room. "She said she had things in hand. I trusted her." "You knew about night patrols?" I asked. "No," he said. "Not really." Eleanor would go on about safety. I thought she meant community watch, lawn signs, things like that. "Did she show you any papers?" I asked. He shook his head so hard his hat fell to the floor. "No. She said she had authority, that it was her call. She told me to sign if anyone needed signatures." "That's how she got your signature on the toe?" I asked. He looked like a man lowering himself into a chair with great care. "I signed the paper because she told me it was an HOA request," he said. "I didn't look close enough. You're aware that's a problem?" "Yes." I didn't know what she wanted to do. He said she had a look in her eye when she got like that, like she was trying to fix something that didn't need fixing. I thought she meant well. There was humiliation hanging on his words. It was a human thing. People veneer themselves over a truth because they have to live next to the person they wrong. I could see the fracture in his dignity when his son had to confess. "You're going to have to tell the truth to the board," I said. "You'll have to sign statements." He nodded, shoulders small, like a man called up for a penalty and agreeing to take it because his son's face fit inside his whole worry. That evening, I found myself at the community center. The air smelled of pizza and sanitizer. A small crowd gathered. Ballots sat in a box under a fluorescent light. Eleanor stepped up to the podium with her usual cheer, red lipstick, a voice sharpened to a political edge. She addressed the room like a general. Her husband, Richard, sat near the back, his face a portrait of carved regret. "You all know me," she declared. "I've kept this neighborhood safe. I will always act for our collective good. I will not be bullied by accusations." She gestured, and a ripple of disapproval rose from a corner where Miss Peterson sat, her knitting a small, purposeful pile in her lap. "You'll be voting on the budget and on enforcement measures," Eleanor said. "We must be firm." I sat at the edge of the room and watched the faces. The farmer's squat jaw, the young couple with the baby, the retired teacher with white hair, the man who kept bees people who wanted a neighborhood that hummed like a well-tuned instrument. Some clapped, some glowered. The air tasted of warm cheese and tension. I would need more than clapping and glowering to unmake a presidency. Paperwork would do that. Timestamps would do that. But public sentiment mattered, too. A community that knows how to ask questions is harder to gaslight. Eleanor's speech ended in applause, and she walked from the podium like she'd already won. Richard followed, small and stoic. I caught Leo's eye in the exit line. He was thinner than before. He looked like a boy who'd gone looking for approval in a place that traded in power and come back with nothing. Good speech, he said to Eleanor when he passed. His voice cracked on the word. Thank you, she said. You're learning. He walked past me, and when he did, he mouthed one word. Thanks. I nodded. It was a small thing. Validation doesn't always need sound. Back home, Claire and I sat on the back steps and listened to the neighborhood breathe. The night felt like a book folded to a mark. There was work left to do. The criminal case had foundations, but the civic cleanup would take longer. People would have to learn how to ask small questions. They'd have to replace habit with a little curiosity. They'd have to understand that loudness does not equal right. Do you ever get tired? Claire asked, reaching for my hand. Sometimes, I said, but I sleep better when the logs line up. She smiled. That makes you sound like a man who loves spreadsheets. Guilty, I said. The word was a soft admission. We sat in a comfortable silence, watching the stars stitch the sky. The Titan's immobilizer light blinked like a promise in the distance. There was still the matter of the interior cam clip I hadn't yet shown the HOA board. The log link I hadn't yet connected publicly. The coordinated raid with the state troopers we were still sketching out. The arrests were forthcoming. But the real victory would be in the undoing of power's small machinery. The gate codes, the private guards, the 911 calls used like trumpets. I made a list then in my head of the steps to come. It helped to have the map. The items were simple. IIA documents ready for Miller's file, a subpoena to Copper Flats for the remaining DVR storage, a warrant for the security firm's records, a sealed indictment for any participant, a civil push to ensure the HOA's members could vote on leadership with full disclosure. Each step was a quiet hammer, finding a nail. I woke the next morning to a phone call I almost hoped for. Jenna's voice was brisk, professional, and it carried the kind of excitement only the discovery of a new link brings. We found the gate log, she said. My coffee went cold in my hand, forgotten. Where? I asked. On the HOA server, she said. Someone archived it wrong. The gate code used 2 nights before the tow was logged from a device with Eleanor's credentials at 1:58 a.m. The timestamp matched the vehicle's movement by 42 seconds. I let that sit like a stone settling into a pond. 42 seconds, I repeated. 42 seconds, she said. And we pulled a cam from a private garage 1 block over that shows a figure wearing a jacket with an HOA insignia. Bring it, I said. Bring it all. She clipped off. The rest of the day turned into a pull of strings and the satisfying clink of small locks opening. Evidence is like that, tedious until it sings. The case had been about a crooked driveway and a shove of authority. It had unfolded into something bigger, a test of civic muscle. The neighborhood would be bruised. Lives would be complicated. But the truth, the dull, patient truth of logs and times and small hardware imprints would be its own kind of justice. Search warrants were scheduled. The raids would involve troopers in crisp uniforms, the kind that looked like the law had grown a backbone. Sergeant Miller's file would sit with the IIA supervisor like an accusation that needed tending. Eleanor would no longer be the loudest voice in the room. And yet, there was unease, good sharp unease, because I knew people who vanished into habits of power might try to come back in softer forms. That was why the cleanup had to be thorough. At dusk, I found myself at the precinct again, watching a feed of coordinates and logs and camera clips. The repair of a community is a composite of small truths. Each truth had a weight. The sum of them carried force. The GPS pings, the tow manifest, the ledger notes, the voicemail from a burner the pieces fit. They had to be presented not as an argument shouted from a rooftop, but as a pattern, patient and unrelenting. I rehearsed the sequence in my mind like a man going over a speech, when to call the troopers, when to seal the warrants. The timing mattered. If the raid came too early, we'd risk losing the chain. Too late, and we'd let someone move evidence into the dark. We aimed for late enough to get maximum effect, early enough to catch them in their own complacency. A coalition of state troopers agreed to assist. Eleanor was out on bond and back home. They understood the PR risks and the legal elegance of a well-executed takedown. We coordinated with the county prosecutor. We briefed an IIA supervisor who'd taken Miller's letter seriously and had a file open on the chain of command that had allowed a man to use 911 like a battering ram. When the night came for the search, the sky was clear as bone. The air smelled of cold and something metallic, the quiet scent of impending business. I felt the familiar steadying in my chest. This was my element, not the roars of traffic, but the precise march of a plan. We split into teams. Ramirez took the east flank. Jenna had the west. State troopers would secure exits. My team walked to the front door with warrants in hand and a purpose in our posture. We knocked, not loudly, not in theatrical fashion. The door opened before any of us presented papers. That's often the case. People open doors without reading the room. Eleanor stood there, eyes wide like someone who'd been woken and told a secret in the middle of the night. Richard was behind her, small and hollowed. Leo looked 10 years older. You have warrants, Eleanor said, her voice trying to be sharp without cause. You have a choice, I said. You can cooperate, or you can decline and make it worse for yourself. She opened her mouth to say something ornate. Richard stepped forward and put his hands on her shoulders. The gesture was soft and human in a room of metal and authority. Eleanor, he said, voice low. Just do what they ask. She looked at him like she'd been stabbed by a small kindness and then turned away. I will, she said. But know this. I acted for our safety. For a show, I said. For drama. She drew herself up. You're making this about me, she said. You don't understand. I understand enough, I said. You used calls to 911 the way you use a flashlight, sudden, blinding. And then you look away and expect everyone else to cover the mess. That's not leadership. Her face flickered with something that might have been a memory of an angry childhood or a calculus where loudness once bought you room. Too many people get to power by being louder than everyone else. Too many people stay in power by making noise. We searched the garage and found the relay kit in a box labeled Community Fest. A receipt inside matched an invoice to Eleanor's HOA account for event supplies. It was small and stupid and perfect. It tied her to the tamper devices. It tied the practical tools of manipulation to an official ledger. Leo watched us with a face like someone who expected a storm and finally felt the rain. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who knew that storms were sometimes necessary to clean the air. They moved through the house with dignity, or at least a version of it. Eleanor protested in a voice that tried to be high and official. Richard kept quiet, hands on his hat. Leo sat on the stoop and watched the officers remove the little boxes of tech that had tried to act big. I felt an odd tug of compassion for Richard, for Leo, for Eleanor. Power corrupts, but it also messes with the people who get caught in its eddies. A person like Eleanor is not a cartoon villain. She was a woman who'd been told she was the solution and believed it until the belief made a grin of cruelty. That's the dangerous kind of arrogance, the self-righteous kind. As we loaded evidence into black bags, I thought about the community center, the ballots, the smell of pizza and disinfectant. We were unearthing a pattern, but this was only the beginning of a long repair. There would be court dates, depositions, cries of injustice from folks who loved the noise she made. There would be meetings where people, finally uncomfortable, would have to make choices about the kind of neighborhood they wanted to be. I walked out into the clear night and felt the cold like a hand that steadied me. The troopers closed the gate like a book. The neighbor's porch light flicked to life. The stars looked like small, patient witnesses. The Titan waited in its yard, quiet and whole. Its immobilizer light blinked the old, steady blink of a machine that had been tried and found honest. I put my hand on it like a man saying a private thanks. The work wasn't over. It was just moving into the parts where paper mattered more than volume, where signatures mattered more than speeches. When we left the scene, Leo's hand brushed mine in the processing room. He looked at me with a small, unasked for trust. Thank you, he whispered like confetti falling in a room that had been silent too long. I only shook my head and said, you did the heavy lifting. You told the truth. He exhaled, the sound of a person dropping a weight. That night, when I closed the evidence locker and walked back to my car, the air tasted less like iron. There was a softness at the edges of my resolve, a sense that facts were doing their work. But facts, I reminded myself, required guardians. They did not shout. They did not interrupt meetings. They sat quietly in servers and in logs, and sometimes you had to sit with them and wait and pull the thread. The louder someone gets, the more you need to tend to the small things. I drove home under a sky that looked like an old Navy coat. At the house, Sophie greeted me with a drawing taped to the fridge, a Titan in crayon with a big blinking light. Claire laughed when she saw it. You told her about it? She asked. Maybe a little, I said. She thinks cars can be heroes. Of course they can, she said. They get to go places. We sat with a quiet meal and a pile of laundry between us. Claire leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You always make it sound simpler than it is." "I make it sound like a plan," I corrected, and then I stretched the word into a promise. "Because plans are how we beat noise." She kissed my temple, soft and sure. "Then plan on getting some sleep," she said. I lay awake after she slept. The house hummed. Fridge, heater, faint street noise. We had done the right thing. We turned noise into proof. The fix would take time. People would have to ask small questions and want facts more than drama. I thought of Miller's stiff apology, of Richard and Leo, of Eleanor's red lipstick in dim light, of the yard, the gap on the thumb drive, the tiny scrape from the jiggler, tiny marks. Big weight. Morning brought hearings and filings. Some neighbors wanted the old way because it felt easy. Others wanted better rules. You can arrest a person, not a habit. That work belongs to the block. Patience, votes, minutes read, not shouted. I turned the Titan's key. It started clean. The immobilizer blinked and died. I smelled that faint, safe ozone. I drove to the precinct with a plan and a steady heart. There were more statements to take, more motions to sign. The board would meet again. Letters would fly. Lawyers would posture. But the logs waited. They did not yell. They just held the truth. At my desk, I laid out the next steps. Troopers, records, meetings, and audit on toes. It looked like a map. It felt like a promise. Step by step. No drama, just work. Sun cut the blinds into warm stripes. I smiled and asked the small questions in my head. Where's the log? Who signed? What time? Facts are not loud. They don't make a scene. They hold.